today I wanted to just say, if anybody was struggling, and it doesn't seem that way from this group here, but there might be some people at home because we're about 36 in the group all up, so there's a lot of people who are not around today but will listen to this at home. And a huge part of this is trial and error. The science is still pretty sketchy when it comes to a lot of this stuff, and I think sometimes we get stuck in a particular way, or we think a particular way is right, and we get really scared to try something else. What's going to happen? Am I suddenly just going to balloon? And it doesn't really happen like that. It's just about trying different things. And an example is I saw somebody this week who has been in full-blown ketosis, like ketone levels of anything above 0.5, I would say you are burning fat really efficiently. And her ketone levels were sitting on average at about 2, 2.5, and have been for a period of about 8 months. So, like you hear that and you think, wow, she must be flying. But she feels flat, she feels depressed, her legs feel like lead, and her weight loss has stopped. So she initially lost about 12 kilos, she probably needed to lose about 20, and so weight loss has stopped and not feeling great. But she's just petrified of going out of ketosis now. But logically you'd say, well, that's not working for you. It might have worked at the start, but we need to do something different now. And we start off with this fear of fat, and it's really difficult to eat the fat because it's been instilled in us, all the negativity around it. And then we do something different and it starts working, but then we hit a wall and we're scared to try something new again. And for her, it's absolutely clearly obvious that she needs to try something new, that she needs to possibly increase her carb cycle in and out of ketosis, try a whole lot of different stuff, stop eating as much fat and maybe bring in more protein. Like, there's a whole heap of things that she could do, but she's so fixated on this ketosis thing. So trial and error is hugely important. Don't be afraid to try something different for a couple of weeks and see how your body responds. You'll know straight away if it's not right for you, but sometimes you do have to persevere. So if you try something new just for a week, you might not feel great, but if you do it for 2 weeks, it might click. So don't try and just give up straight away. Persevere with anything new you do for at least 2 or so weeks. But don't be scared to do that. It's a huge part of learning what's right for your body. And then what often happens is you've been doing something for ages and ages and it's working really well, and then all of a sudden things change. And maybe it's a change of your hormones, maybe you become, for females, menopausal, perimenopausal, and all of a sudden it's all different. And you need to revisit everything again, do something different again. So it's constant and it's hard. Diet is not simple. It's constantly changing with us, and I'd love to tell people that it's easy and you just figure it out and off you go, but it's not. And that's the reality of it, is that we constantly need to rejig, change. When our bodies get used to things, we naturally get lazy physiologically, so we need to keep on doing things to reawaken and reinvigorate and all of that sort of stuff. So today my main focus of the talk is going to be around fasting, because I find that a lot of the time people can get to a point with low carb where they just feel stuck. And it generally happens, for people maybe who initially lose a whole stack of weight and then they've still got quite a bit to lose and they can't get to that next level. Or it might be people who just have that stubborn, 4 or 5 kilos that they just can't get rid of and they're battling with. And it's about just finding something else to boost you along. And whenever you say that word fasting, people might send shivers down your spine. Like, what is that? we were speaking about it last night at the Christmas party, and Pierre, who works here, he said, well, what do I eat? And I said, well, nothing. So that's what I do? I just, nothing? Yes, fasting, no food. And, you know, that's like crazy. How can we do that? How can we survive? And how can that be beneficial? Isn't our metabolic rate going to plummet, and aren't we going to feel revolting? And, you know, in fact, it's quite the opposite. So I want to go through a little bit about that and how you can possibly start thinking about incorporating this in a not scary way. Okay, so I'm going to take a bit of a backwards pedal, and I want to take you through a little bit of the complete opposite of fasting, the complete opposite approach to fasting, which is what we've been doing in Australia, I guess, in the modern world for the last 50, 100 years or whatever it is, and that is the whole calorie in, calorie out model. And one of the greatest examples of this is the program that many of you, I'm sure, have watched, The Biggest Loser. And people come into The Biggest Loser house and they need to lose a huge amount of weight. And in order to do that, they are put onto a very, very calorie-controlled diet, and they exercise massively, 5+ hours a day. And so they did a few episodes of this, and you might have noticed that they never did a reunion show, because what was happening is that they'd lose all the weight, and then most of them would regain it. A year later, they would be back to where they were before plus. And so what they decided to do is the next show, they got a whole lot of scientists in, and they did metabolic studies on these people in the house. And this is what they found. And this is this little thing up here. So at the start, this is the average of all the people in The Biggest Loser house. At the start, this was them over here. So these two categories over there give you the amount of calories that they were burning on a daily basis, and we divide that into two sections. So the blue section is our resting metabolic rate. So to do nothing but lie in bed and survive, that is your resting metabolic rate. Okay? So before they came into the house, or at the start, they sat at about 3,200 calories a day is what they were burning without doing anything, just sitting around or lying around. That's what they burned. The exercise, or just their everyday activity, and that just might be the work that you do and walking from here and there, whatever, it might be planned exercise. So that's your non-resting energy expenditure. So exercise, everything else on top of it, gave them another 1,200 calories, so that the average person came into the house burning 4,000 calories a day. Okay, does that make sense? Yes. Then they did this study 6 weeks later. So they had been calorie counting, pulling their calories right down and exercising to the nth degree. And what happened is that their resting metabolic rate, so the amount that they required just to sit and do nothing, plummeted, came down. But because they were doing 5 hours plus of exercise per day whilst they were in the house, their overall calorie that they were burning a day was greater. But the key here is this resting metabolic rate, because once you begin impacting that, that's the danger zone.
Isn't that from the weight loss? If you lose weight, then your body has less...
To a degree, but it doesn't have to be that way. And it relates specifically also to muscle mass. So if you're losing weight correctly, the majority of that should be fat mass. And that shouldn't impact that. Maybe a small amount, but nothing as significant as that. So they must have been losing muscle mass, yes, but they've also, just their body, because of the low amount of calories that they were taking in, your body then naturally wants to not expend as much. It's a survival mechanism. So then they go out of the house, and this is them now out of the house, where they return to the type of expenditure that they were before. But now their resting is way less than it was there. And so over time, they could be doing exactly what they were doing before they went into the house, but over time they'll gain a heap more weight than they were before because they just don't burn as much. This is the problem with the calorie counting model. And the reason why it becomes a problem is because when we think about calories, we're thinking that a calorie is a calorie is a calorie. So we eat the calories, they come into one big vat, and we just use whichever calories and we expend them. You know, that there's no distinction between where that calorie is coming from. And the way that it's been described is that this calorie in, calorie out model is thought of, we think about it like a one compartment model. So I'm going to draw this so that it makes a little bit more sense. So this is how we think of this. We've got calories in, like that. We've got this big vat where we, get all the calories into it, and then the calories out. If we work like that, then that one compartment model would be fine. But that is a complete oversimplification of how our physiology works. To try and explain it and make it make as much sense as possible, we want to think of our systems as a two-compartment model. Okay? So we get some calories, and they come in, and they come into what we can describe as a fridge. And the place that houses this, or the fridge, houses glycogen. What is glycogen? Glycogen is stored glucose. Okay, so I want you to think about how you use a fridge in your house. Your fridge is easy to put stuff into. It's easy to take stuff out of. It's exactly like that with glycogen. It's our easy option. Glucose from carbohydrates. It's easy to put it in. Yeah, it's easy to eat it. It's also easy to burn it. Because if you eat glucose, that's going to be your natural instinct, is to then burn it. So the fridge works like that. Easy in, easy out. Calories out on this end. But we have over here a big, huge chest freezer that is sitting in the basement of the house. And that is where all the fat is. And it's hard to use the freezer. Because, to get something out of the freezer, you can't just take it out and you have to wait for it to defrost. And it's hard. It's really hard to get to the freezer and eat the stuff from the freezer. It's way more easier and more convenient to just deal with the fridge. But it's also easy to shove things into the freezer because we run out of room in the fridge. So it's easy to put it in, but it's difficult to get it out. Okay? Now the problem is the more we fill up the fridge, the more we do this. As we fill up the fridge, we cause insulin to go up and up and up and up. And it's insulin that is pushing stuff into the freezer, but not letting us take it back out. It's like this traffic cop that's saying, in you go, but don't come back this way. You know, just this one direction of traffic. And if we keep just focusing on the fridge, we're not going to be able to get the stuff out of the freezer. So the whole calorie in, calorie out doesn't consider these two different compartments. It doesn't consider this hormone insulin, which is the absolute key to everything. What we want to do is we want to do something to this, to insulin. And we want to keep trying to do as much as we possibly can to insulin so that we can get stuff out of the freezer and stop using the fridge so much. All right. So what we've done over the last 6 weeks is that we have, hopefully, most of you, begun influencing your insulin. Because, as I said right at the start, is that many, many, many things influence the amount of insulin that you secrete. But probably the greatest influence is carbohydrate. So what we've done over the last few weeks is that we've tried to bring down the carbohydrate in our diet so that at the same time we're lowering the amount of insulin in our diet, okay? But the issue here is that everything we do, the amount we sleep, the stress that we have, everything in our lives influences insulin. And so sometimes just lowering the carbohydrate in your diet isn't enough to help you along and to help get you to get the stuff out of the freezer. Okay? And so we've got to look at possibly other ways or further ways that we can influence insulin. Now, this is not my area of expertise, but you need to look at your stress in your life and how you feel about your work and your family and your relationships and all of this sort of stuff. Because sometimes it's that, and you're doing everything right with your diet and things are just not moving in the right direction because your insulin's through the roof and you just can't burn fat. So all this other stuff plays a massive role. Exercise, the type of exercise that you do, the intensity, the duration, everything. All of this is influencing it. But something that we can do to really impact it is fasting. And fasting can be hugely impactful and almost is like a little bit of a shortcut or a cheat's way of getting your insulin down quickly. I just want to show you another little graph to show you that unfortunately it's not a level playing field. And what I mean by that is that everybody's baseline of insulin is slightly different. Okay? So let's just have a little look at this graph for a second. So this is breakfast time down there. That's lunch. That's dinner. And that is a baseline insulin level for this particular person that I'm going to speak about. So what that means is that when they're not eating, like overnight, that's where their insulin goes back down to. That's their base level insulin. Then they have breakfast in the morning and they have a spike and it comes back down. And if they're insulin sensitive enough, they'll have a little bit of time at baseline and then they'll go back up for lunch and then they'll go back up for dinner and then they'll come back and they'll be back at baseline. That's what would happen if you had 3 meals a day. Now, if you were low carb, let's say the same person was having a low carb diet, then their baseline would still be there, but maybe they would only do that or they would come back quicker, that sort of thing. So that's what a low-carb diet might be able to do for this particular person. But this particular person is an insulin-sensitive person. So their body responds to insulin very quickly. This is a lean person who doesn't really have any issues with their weight, who is pretty healthy. That's that person there. The difference is that the next person that we look at their baseline is there. So this now is your insulin-resistant person. They don't respond very well to insulin. This is your person who is overweight, who possibly has a whole lot of health issues as well. Can you see that we're not on a level playing field to start off with? So this person wakes up in the morning and this is where their insulin is. There. It's higher than the person, the insulin-sensitive person, when they're at their highest spike. Their baseline is higher than that person's spike. Okay? And then they're going to eat and they're going to shoot right up and they probably will come down to maybe there. So they don't come back to baseline and it takes them a long time to do that. So they only maybe get to their baseline for a couple of hours overnight. So if that person went low carb, we could change that a little bit, you know. So there's their baseline, they do that, they come back to base, they do that, and it's looking better, but there's still this. How are we going to pull the baseline down? What do we need to do to really change things for this person? This is the little change. This is a few kilos. This is, oh, I feel a bit better, but it's nothing significant. In order to make it significant for that person, we need to do something different, more. And all those other things that I said influence insulin, that's going to be a start in the right direction. But this is where fasting comes in. Because fasting can dramatically change this very quickly. Okay. So, what do I mean by fasting? The most simple form of fasting is not snacking. So, you know, we have a culture of eating every few hours. If we just took that away and we did 3 meals a day, for an insulin-sensitive person, that's a good way to go. You know, because they're going to then keep their baseline and come back to base all the time. And throughout their life, as they have changes and stress and whatever, hormonal changes and go through different life things, they're going to keep on coming back to base with those 3 meals instead of just snacking and then possibly things getting out of control. That's the most simple form. The next way you can take a little step forward is to start thinking about decreasing the number of meals that you have in a day. So, you know, what low carb allows us to do is it allows us to have better control over our hunger and our appetite. Do people recognise that? Like you weren't as hungry and not thinking of food as much. And so it allows you to go for extended periods of time without eating. So you might, you know, wake up and not really feel hungry and therefore you delay breakfast. And so you allow yourself to stay at the baseline for longer and then you just have maybe 2 spikes in your day. Or maybe you have 2 meals and a sort of snacky meal, so you just have a mini spike. But you've got less spike, less time above your baseline. Now, the longer we can stay at baseline, the more chance we have of bringing that baseline down. So those two strategies are like the start of the fasting strategy. But the next thing to do is to take it a little step further, and that's putting specific protocols to it. So one of the protocols that is out there is a 16-8 protocol, and that's fasting for a 16-hour period in your day and eating in a window of 8 hours. And I've had people who have done, eat later in the day, so have breakfast or whatever you want to call it at 12 o'clock, and then they'll have dinner within the 8-hour window, and then 16 hours. And still, things are not working, but then they change, and I go back to that whole trial and error thing, they change the pattern of that. They have breakfast first thing in the morning, they have their second meal around the middle of the day, and they fast from then over to breakfast, and suddenly things work. Why? I don't know. Nobody knows. But it's little things like that that could potentially make a difference. So it's playing around with a particular protocol in the way that you actually implement it into your day as well. So that's one. But someone might, people will go, well, it doesn't really work because I work sort of, from this time to this time, and it doesn't matter as long as you're doing it in some shape or form. So maybe yours is a 15-9 protocol or 14-10, but you are having an extended period in a 24-hour period where you are not eating. And you're keeping your insulin flatlined. And that over time is going to make you more and more insulin sensitive and help to start bringing your baseline down. Now, unfortunately, those strategies generally are still working for the people who are on the spectrum. We've got insulin sensitive down that end, and we've got insulin resistant down that end, and it's usually, if I'm standing in the middle, it's people on this side that are going to respond from those fasting strategies. If you're more on this side, then you might need to take this a step further. So what can we do? So the next protocol, and this is where we need to start implementing some other things. So I'll talk about what they are first, and then I'll talk about what we need to do. And this is where we go a 24-hour fast. And you might do this just a couple of times a week. So you might choose like a Monday and a Thursday. So you eat on Sunday night, and then the next time you eat is Monday night. That's 24 hours without eating. And then you do that again, Wednesday night to Thursday night. So 2 periods of 24 hours in the week where you don't eat. A modified version of this is the 5 and 2 diet that you might have heard of, which is quite popular as well. But the 5 and 2 doesn't go a complete fast. They bring it down to no more than 500 calories on those days. And I'd say, I'm standing in the middle of the insulin sensitive resistant, I'd say the insulin sensitive people could possibly get away with that reduction of the calories, so 500 calories or less on 2 days a week. But if you're on this side of the spectrum, then you probably want to go 0 for those 2 24-hour periods, because that's giving you complete break. Your whole system is going to be as low as possible in terms of insulin from food for 24 hours. Okay, I'll talk more about what you need to be aware of there in a second. If you want to take that sort of a step further, you might say once a month, do alternate days of 24-hour fast for a week. So you go Monday, and then you eat normally, Tuesday, and then you go Wednesday, and you alternate, and you have maybe 3 or 4 24-hour blocks in a week, and then you go back to just once or twice, or you go back to a 16-8 protocol, so you can blend these sort of into each other a little bit as well. So the alternating days takes it a little bit of a step further again. So I still think that's sort of, it's not hardcore yet. That's the easy stuff. Like, I think we can all sort of fathom, I can have dinner and then I'll just go to work the next day. When I come home, I'll have dinner again. Like, it's kind of easy, especially when you're doing low carb and you are fairly fat adapted, you know. But the next one maybe scares a few people, and this is a 3-day fast. And you know, I was recommending 3-day fasts to a lot of my patients, and I was saying, no, you'll be fine, and you know, just go with it. And I thought, you know, I think I better do it, but just so that I know. And so Joey and I did a 3-day fast over a year ago now. We just did once off 3-day fast, and we were both amazed. We were both absolutely amazed at how easy it was. And you know, we got a bit grumpy at the end of day 2, because you do, and I'll tell you why that happens physiologically, but grumpy and hungry at the end of 48 hours. But come day 3, I wasn't even hungry to then break my fast. And when I did, I had a very small amount to eat, and that was enough. So why does that happen? You know, like, this is completely opposite to what you might expect to happen. Because, so if we look at the stages of what happens physiologically to your body, when you eat, for the next 5-6 hours, you then burn or utilise whatever it is that you've eaten. If we're not eating low carb, so we're just eating a average sort of carb diet, whatever it is. So you'll burn whatever it is for 6 hours. Then after 6 hours, your body will go in search of any carbohydrate that you have in storage anywhere, which is your muscle and your liver. And it will take it out of your muscles and your liver, and it will utilise that for the next, depends on how much you've got in storage. You know, it might take 24 hours or so. For us, who've been doing low carb, there's not much there. It might take an hour or so, and we're on to the next stage. And the next stage is we then take other things in our body, like lactate, amino acids, other bits and pieces, and we turn them into glucose. And that's a process called gluconeogenesis. So we then have glucose from other sources, but we're still doing the glucose thing. We're still in the fridge. Yeah. But then all of that runs out. And it runs out for 2 reasons. It runs out because we run out of substrate to provide us that glucose, but also because now our insulin level is coming down. It's coming down, it's coming down. For somebody who's eating a high carb diet, by the end of day 2, their insulin has plummeted to a level where they can now start tapping into fat, like big time. They can just start bringing it out. That traffic cop now has changed his way, and he is shunting it out of the freezer and into the bloodstream and out to where we can use it. And you start utilising fat at a massive rate. So day 3, you produce ketones, and ketones are a byproduct of fat breakdown. So you hear about ketosis. When you're in ketosis, it means that you are burning fat. And when you first go into ketosis, some people describe it as a bit euphoric, like you're extremely focused, your adrenaline levels are higher, so you've got heaps of energy. We continued work during that period, and as you guys know, our work is pretty physical. We did our own exercise during those 3 days, just like normal, because adrenaline is lifted, you're not breaking down more amino acids, your protein. It's completely opposite to what you might think will happen. But the key is that your insulin level has jumped down. It's jumped down to a new base. And even, on the first time you do this, you might bring your base down just to there. And then you do it a month or so later. And then you do it a month or so later again. Or instead of doing a 3-day fast, you do a 5-day fast and you bring it down even quicker. Up to about a 5-day fast, if you are relatively healthy, you are not taking any medication, you do not have a history of heart failure, you want to be sure that you are healthy, up to a 5-day fast, there's no risk. There is only benefit. If you are pregnant, no. If you are a child, no. There are a few limitations, but most of you here today would be absolutely 100% fine doing a 3 to 5 day fast. I do not ever recommend doing a 2-day fast, because if you do a 2-day fast, you will break it at the height of feeling the crappiest. And then you will never want to do that again. If you wait, just go to bed and get home that night, you'll be grumpy and hungry, get into bed and go to sleep, and the next morning you'll wake up, you'll be a different person. And then you push it out another 12 hours and you break it then. And you have just burned pure fat for that last 24 hours. 4,000 odd calories of pure fat. We can all do that. And then if you can keep going for another day or two and tap into that. If you're wanting to go further, like there have been people that I've seen who have really, really been struggling and have done 10-day fasts, 12-day fasts, absolutely fine, but medical supervision is required. So if you are going to take it further, then you can speak to me and I'll direct you to a GP who is more than happy to be by your side. We need to just monitor things, electrolyte levels, fluid levels, that sort of stuff during the period. But 3 to 5 days is fine. Once you also go beyond 5 days, you want to make sure that you've actually got enough fat to burn. And so if you're a skinny mini and you think that this is the go for you, well, it really isn't, because it's quite dangerous. So if you've got a BMI of less than 20 and you fast, you can experience something called refeeding syndrome when you go to eat again. And it's fatal. And so you definitely, this is not for people who are thin, who are lean. This is for people who are here on this side of my spectrum. Yeah. Refeeding syndrome was discovered in anorexics, anorexics who starved themselves and then binged and would die. And it's because of an electrolyte imbalance that occurs. So if you're on that side of the spectrum, you probably want to do things, the first few ones that I spoke about. Less meals, 16-8, maybe a 24-hour once or twice a week. If you're on this side of the spectrum, then you can start going 3, 5 days with supervision more than that. The results are dramatic. They are absolutely dramatic. Like on the first session here, there were a couple of people who I pointed out, and both of them did extended day fasts and just had incredible results. And it's not that you then have to do that again and again. Sometimes, once every 6 months you might throw it in if you've hit another wall or plateau. But what that does, it's amazing what that does to your insulin level and your sensitivity. So if you're sitting, you're sort of banging your head and not quite sure what to do next, there's a few more little tools in your belt that you could possibly pull out. So if you're doing more than just the 16-8, so if you've gone to a 24-hour fast, you do need to be aware of your fluid and your electrolyte levels. And so you need to stay on top of those two things. I will give you all resources following this session today, which will stipulate exactly what you should be having. But basically, over a 24-hour period, you need roughly 3 litres of fluid. And you can have that fluid. It needs to be clear fluid, so water, soda water, mineral water, herbal tea, black coffee. And the last one on that list is clear broth. And clear broth can be extremely useful because you can actually add things to the broth to make it quite palatable. Sometimes broth, people just can't stand broth and then they don't go there. But broth can be really helpful. It's it just gives you that mouth feel, that there's some flavour and taste if you're looking for something during that period. And when you make your own broth at home, you can put the required electrolytes into it, which is mainly salt. So I will give you a recipe for broth to make sure that you're getting your salt levels, and then you're getting, you know, the fluid as well, and it's just a little bit nicer than just the clear fluids. And the broth, you know, to make the broth, some people, first of all, I can't stand the smell in the house. I'm not doing that. Or it's just going to take too long. I couldn't be bothered, whatever it might be. Luckily, we do have, and I'll give you a couple of examples. So you can get broth in a couple of different forms. Broth, to me, I'm not, you know, an advocate for everything organic, because I think we need to be realistic in life. If we all went all organic, we might all be broke too. So, but if you're going to do bone broth at home, 100%, you must have organic bones, definitely, because what you are doing in the process is you are leaching every possible thing that you can out of the bone. And if there's stuff in there that you don't want, it's coming into your fluid. So you want organic bones. If you don't want to make it yourself, you have an option. There are many now available, mostly at, you know, your organic grocers, where you can buy bone broth, and they're pretty strong, so you then dilute them. You know, so you might put a quarter cup and then you put water for the rest. Depending, then you want to start reading the back, and you want to check out what the sodium level is, and you want to make sure that you're getting enough sodium salt in. If you don't like broth, you're not going to have broth, or you just can't get enough salt into your broth because then it becomes unpalatable, then you need to get salt into you some other way during that 24-hour period. And that could be as simple as going to the chemist and getting salt tablets and just downing them. So salt is important, and I'll put the specific recommendations into that handout that I'll drop box to everybody later on. So sodium, fluid are your two main things that you need to look after, and that's it. That's really it. There's convenient things like this too. This is a dehydrated broth. Joey and I used this when we did it. I could not stand the taste of it after a couple of days. But, you know, you might find it okay. It's very convenient because you can just stick it in your bag, then you just take a tablespoon and put hot water and you've got broth. So, yeah, but homemade broth definitely tastes better than commercial broth as far as I'm concerned. But broth can be really, really useful. If you don't like the broth, then you've got to go to salt tablets. You've got to look after your electrolytes. If you don't get enough sodium into you when you're doing a 24-hour plus fast, you won't cope very well. You'll start feeling pretty awful, and you'll probably have to break your fast. So that's it. You know, fasting is so simple, and you know, there's all these diets out there that cost a fortune and require you to take a million things, and then there's fasting. You don't pay anything. It's, you know, it's flexible. It's convenient. It's, you know, it's all these things, and it does. You know, I'm just touching on the surface of what it does for us in terms of insulin, and there's all sorts of other evidence to say what it does for us. And if we go back in the ages and we look at fasting, it's come through history. We always fasted. Religious groups fast for all sorts of reasons, and prior to that, before it was a voluntary fast, we fasted. We went through times of feast and famine or fast, you know. And it was natural. It was a natural part of us. And people, you know, scientists who are in the fasting side of things, they believe that fasting has to be a part of our lives in order for us to be healthy. Not that it, you know, you do it just to give yourself a boost. You know, that we need to have times of eating and times of not. And I think that it makes sense. And it's almost, if you look at, I was speaking last night, a great example of this is, if you think of the caveman, if the caveman during a time of famine or fast, if their energy levels just got less and less and less, we wouldn't be around today. They would have to, our physiology would have to be structured in such a way that as we were going through a fast, our energy levels would continue to climb to allow us to go out and hunt and look for food. Because if it didn't, we would just disappear. And that's exactly what happens. You'd be amazed how focused and how energized you are come day 3 of the fast. And if you've not done it before, you're like, I don't know about that. So just give it a go. Just give it a go. It's quite remarkable. And you don't have to stop your life. You just keep going to work, and you don't have to take any lunch. It's easy. You
Get a lot more time to work.
Yes.
Yeah.
People think, oh, I'll better find 3 days, or I can stay home and half a day. Not at all. It's worse. Yeah. Yeah. And you keep yourself busy. You will get hungry. You'll get hungry on day 2, absolutely. But it's just getting through those few hours before you really get into getting into that freezer. That's it for today. But that's it for the 6 weeks with me. I hope that you've all gotten something out of this and feel like you can move forward with information and motivation and all of that sort of stuff. We're always here if you need a bit more help, and myself, and even Joey's not a dietitian, but he probably knows just as much as I do because he hears it all the time. Just chat to us. A lot of you are in and out of here all the time. Just chat to us. If you need to sit down and go through things in details, we can always organise appointments and that sort of stuff. So keep moving forward. It just needs to be a part of life. It's not a 6-week thing. It's an 8-week thing. It's just got to. And the more you do it, the easier it